Imagine this. You're a respected Roman senator, one of the most trusted men in the empire. Your family name stretches back generations. Your toga carries the noble purple stripe, and you've spent a lifetime serving Rome with honor. Tonight, you've been summoned to dine with the emperor himself, an invitation that should inspire pride. But climbing the marble steps of the Palatine Hill, your stomach knots with dread. The guards at the entrance avoid your gaze. They understand what awaits you inside, and their silence says more than words ever could. The rich incense drifting through the air can't disguise something heavier. Fear, thick and suffocating. You enter the grand hall. Rome's most powerful are already gathered. Senators, their wives, wealthy merchants, military commanders, every one of them standing in tense silence. Then you hear it. Footsteps echoing down the corridor, followed by manic laughter that chills your blood. Emperor Caligula appears, wrapped in silk that gleams like molten gold. His eyes blaze with a feverish brightness. He studies the room like a predator sizing up its prey, then claps his hands with theatrical excitement. "My friends," he declares, his voice bouncing off the marble, "tonight we shall learn who among you truly loves your emperor. We shall see just how far you'll go to prove your loyalty." What follows will break every boundary of Roman decency, turning the sacred halls of power into the stage for the emperor's darkest hungers. This is the story of how one man's madness poisoned an entire empire, and how absolute power became absolute corruption. Before we dive into these buried accounts of cruelty and survival, if you're fascinated by the hidden side of history, hit that like button and subscribe for more. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'm always amazed that we're exploring the ancient world together from different parts of the modern one, connected across time and distance by curiosity. To understand how the most powerful man on earth could transform his palace into a chamber of sexual depravity and psychological torment, you have to understand how Caligula became emperor in the first place. Born Gaius Julius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus in 12 CE, he earned the nickname Caligula, Little Boots, as a boy on campaign with his father, dressed in miniature military gear that charmed the legionaries. But childhood in the imperial family was anything but innocent. By age 7, Caligula had watched his father die under suspicious circumstances. Poison, many believed, ordered by Emperor Tiberius. He watched his mother Agrippina the Elder and his brothers vanish into exile, imprisonment, and death, victims of the brutal politics of Rome. Imagine growing up knowing a knock at the door could be the end. Caligula survived by learning to hide his thoughts and mask his fear. He trained himself to appear harmless while his family was destroyed around him. That trauma hardened into a lifelong obsession with control, domination, and humiliation, especially toward anyone who reminded him of the power that once crushed his family. When Tiberius finally died in 37 CE, the Roman people welcomed 24-year-old Caligula with genuine relief. Here was the son of the beloved Germanicus, the child who once marched with the legions in miniature armor. After decades of enduring the paranoid, withdrawn rule of Tiberius, Rome longed for someone young, someone who promised a return to the glory and confidence of the Republic's golden age. And for 7 months, Caligula was everything they hoped for. He recalled political exiles, showered the Praetorian Guard with gifts, and staged lavish public spectacles. The crowds adored him. Then something changed, so violently that it didn't just alter his behavior, it rewired the empire itself. Late in 37 CE, Caligula fell gravely ill with what ancient writers call a brain fever. The empire froze. For days, he drifted between life and death, while Rome prayed for its young ruler's survival. Some historians believe that illness left permanent brain damage. Others argue it simply stripped away the thin layer of sanity restraining a mind already scarred by trauma. When Caligula rose from his sickbed, he was different, and those closest to him saw it instantly. The restrained, hopeful young emperor was gone. In his place stood a man who seemed detached from reality itself. A man who no longer recognized boundaries between sacred and obscene, duty and pleasure, emperor and god. The transformation didn't reveal itself to the public at first. Only the palace felt the early tremors. It started subtly: reckless spending, strange outbursts in private councils, decisions that defied logic. But behind the sealed doors of the imperial palace, something far more sinister had awakened. During his brush with death, Caligula had discovered a new truth: the addictive realization that as emperor, he could do anything to anyone without consequence. No senate, no law, no god. No one could stop him. The palace staff were the first to feel the shift. Servants who had served the imperial family for years suddenly found themselves trapped in a nightmare of the emperor's making. Young male slaves became targets of his twisted curiosity, summoned to his chambers and forced into acts that violated every Roman idea of dignity. But the worst suffering fell on the palace women. Ancient historians, writing in the veiled caution of their era, describe how Caligula stalked the corridors at night, selecting women at random to satisfy his impulses. These weren't affairs. They were demonstrations of power, brutal reminders that everyone in the palace existed at his pleasure. And Caligula's appetite didn't stop with household servants. Soon, Caligula wasn't just targeting palace servants. He began summoning the wives of senators and high-ranking officials under polite pretenses. A discussion about your husband's promotion, or a matter of state. These women, raised in the rigid honor codes of Rome's elite, suddenly found themselves trapped. Refusing the emperor wasn't just dangerous, it was a death sentence, and not just for them, but for their fathers, children, and husbands. Caligula made certain everyone understood the stakes. One contemporary account describes a scene so disturbing it haunted Rome for decades. Caligula would order noblewomen to strip naked and perform sexual acts while he watched from a raised platform, laughing like a spectator at the games. Sometimes he brought in multiple women at once and forced them to compete for his attention like slaves at auction. But the true horror wasn't the sex. It was the strategy. Caligula weaponized intimacy to destroy the Roman social order. These were women accustomed to commanding entire households, now degraded into entertainment. It wasn't spontaneous lust. It was calculated humiliation. Soon, the emperor began hosting elaborate banquets that started as respectable dinner parties and ended as orchestrated orgies. Senators arrived with their wives and daughters expecting polite conversation. Instead, the emperor slowly pushed the evening across a line nobody dared resist. He would recline on his couch, smile politely, and with the casual tone of someone requesting more wine, say, "Senator Marcus, your wife has such beautiful eyes. I wonder what they look like when she's on her knees before me." The room was silent. No one dared breathe. The senator could do nothing but sit frozen in silence. Any protest, any hint of resistance meant execution. Not just for him, but for his entire bloodline. Meanwhile, his wife would be forced to obey the emperor's demands, compelled to perform whatever sexual act Caligula wished, often while her husband and children sat helplessly watching. The psychological destruction was permanent. Families shattered, marriages ruined, children scarred, lineages that had stood proud for centuries reduced to props in the emperor's grotesque theater. Caligula seemed to take special pleasure in forcing husbands to witness their wives' humiliation. He would arrange the seating himself, ensuring that every senator had a perfect view as their wife was forced to perform or endure the emperor's whims. The mix of rage, helplessness, and shame on the men's faces gave him almost as much satisfaction as the acts themselves, and the palace itself was transformed into a labyrinth of depravity. Caligula ordered new chambers designed specifically for sexual displays, elaborate rooms with couches arranged in circles so every act could be seen from every angle. Archaeological fragments suggest entire spaces where normal furniture was replaced with stages, platforms, and performance areas. One room, according to ancient descriptions, resembled a miniature amphitheater. Raised seating surrounded a central area where Caligula orchestrated sexual spectacles. Slaves, captives, even Roman citizens were forced to perform, while senators and their families were required to watch and applaud. But nothing inspired more fear than the emperor's bedroom. Unlike the private suites of previous emperors, Caligula's chamber had viewing galleries and multiple entrances, designed for an audience. At any hour, palace servants, guards, or political enemies could be dragged inside to witness whatever the emperor decided to do next. Caligula seemed to take as much pleasure in being observed as in the acts themselves. Sex was no longer private. It had become a public display of supremacy. Every encounter was a declaration of absolute authority. The emperor even created what was, in every practical sense, a brothel inside the palace. But this was no ordinary brothel. It was staffed by the wives and daughters of senators who had displeased him. These were women from ancient noble houses, forced to service not only Caligula, but also his guests, foreign envoys, and sometimes even common soldiers. Humiliation was the point. Their degradation was political currency. And Caligula supervised it all personally, moving through the palace chambers like a director on a stage. He gave commentary, instructions, and mock praise. For him, every act was theater. Everybody in those rooms existed solely for his amusement. But the most disturbing transformation came when Caligula fused sexual degradation with the sacred institutions of Rome itself. The ceremonies and rituals that had held the empire together for centuries were twisted into opportunities for humiliation. During formal Senate sessions, Caligula would command senators' wives to perform sexual acts while their husbands carried out official business. The emperor's message was clear. Even the machinery of government bowed before his desires. Rome's greatest political decisions were made, while Rome's most powerful men were forced to watch their own families be abused. Religion was no safer. Caligula declared himself divine and demanded worship. Priestesses who had taken vows of purity were forced to perform in sexual rituals in his honor. Festivals that had once been solemn and sacred became orchestrated orgies, with unwilling participants drawn from the elite families of Rome. To Caligula, there was no boundary between sex, power, and religion. They were one and the same. Caligula's marriages became infamous spectacles. He wed and divorced with shocking speed, sometimes within days, using each ceremony as a stage for humiliation. One contemporary account describes him ordering the bride's father to stand and watch, while the emperor publicly consummated the marriage before the entire wedding party. What Rome considered sacred, Caligula turned into a performance of domination. His sexual appetites were never just personal indulgence. They became a weapon of economic warfare against the wealthiest families in the empire. Caligula would select the most beautiful wives and daughters of Rome's elite and demand access to them in exchange for their family's security. The message was simple: offer your women or lose everything. A grotesque marketplace emerged. Noble families received invitations instructing their wives or daughters to attend the emperor in private. Everyone knew what these meetings meant, and refusal was impossible. Property, titles, and lives were held hostage to Caligula's desires. Soon the emperor formalized the practice into a kind of sexual tax system. Wealthy households were required to provide their women for set periods of service in the palace, with the duration and frequency calculated according to their financial status. It wasn't prostitution. It was state-mandated sexual slavery used to demonstrate absolute imperial power. Women who resisted paid the price. Some were forced to perform sexual acts in public as entertainment at gladiatorial spectacles. Others were sold into real brothels as punishment. The message was unmistakable. In Caligula's Rome, even the highest-born women could be reduced to property at the emperor's whim. Their noble birth meant nothing. Women of the highest Roman families were stripped of status and forced to serve not just the emperor, but common soldiers and slaves. The message was unmistakable. No rank, no lineage, no reputation placed you outside Caligula's reach. The psychological toll on these women was catastrophic. They had been raised under strict aristocratic values, taught that their virtue was everything, that honor lay in chastity and loyalty to family and Rome. Suddenly, they were reduced to objects in the emperor's sexual theater. The emotional trauma was far more enduring than the physical abuse. Many were ordered to perform acts that violated every moral and religious principle they had been taught since childhood. The contradiction between their upbringing and their forced humiliation shattered their identities. Some suffered complete psychological collapse. Others chose suicide over submission. But Caligula had anticipated that too. Families of women who killed themselves were punished collectively, executed, exiled, or financially ruined. Suicide wasn't an escape. It was another weapon the emperor used to destroy entire bloodlines. Caligula seemed to take special pleasure in breaking the women who resisted. He would escalate the degradation until their will was gone, until the proudest Roman matrons were reduced to silent obedience. Those who finally submitted became warnings, living examples of what happened to those who defied the emperor's desires. But the deepest cruelty fell on the men. Roman senators and noble fathers weren't just forced to watch. They were often made to participate. Caligula ordered fathers to personally deliver their daughters to his chambers. Husbands were commanded to prepare their wives for the emperor. Brothers were made to restrain their own sisters during group sexual rituals. This wasn't just humiliation. It was forced complicity. By making men participate in the destruction of their own families, Caligula annihilated their authority and dignity. A senator who had tied down his own wife for the emperor's pleasure could never again command respect in the Senate. His honor was ruined by his own hands. Some men attempted to refuse, tried to hide or protect their families. Caligula expected that as well. Those who disobeyed faced immediate public execution, often carried out in front of their loved ones. The choice was simple and horrifying: assist in your family's violation, or watch them die. One of the most unsettling elements of Caligula's reign was the way he drew children from Rome's most prominent families into the atmosphere of depravity inside the palace. Ancient sources, cautious in their descriptions, make it clear that even the young were exposed to behavior, environments, and displays that no child should ever witness. These were not children living in a safe imperial household. They were raised in the shadow of excess, coercion, and intimidation. The psychological damage was lifelong. Many of these youths grew into adulthood unable to form normal relationships, their understanding of power and intimacy permanently twisted by the environment in which they were raised. Others repeated the same patterns of domination and cruelty, carrying the corruption forward into their own positions of authority. Caligula understood exactly what he was doing. By shaping the next generation through fear, humiliation, and coercion, he ensured his influence would continue long after his death. The emperor's behavior soon took on the structure of a cult. Caligula declared himself a living god and demanded that the most private aspects of life be treated as forms of worship. This was not simple ego. It was a deliberate attempt to blur every boundary between religion and obedience. Temples and ceremonial spaces were constructed within the palace, and participation in imperial rites became mandatory for anyone seeking favor or simply survival. These were not spiritual rituals. They were demonstrations of control. The ceremonies were staged like political theater, complete with formal roles, choreography, and an audience. Serving the emperor in these rites became a statement of loyalty, and even watching was considered an act of devotion. By framing the humiliation and degradation of Rome's elite families as sacred obligation, Caligula shielded himself behind religion. When noblewomen were coerced into public displays of submission, it was justified as divine ceremony. When youth were exposed to environments of moral and psychological corruption, it was described as initiation, never abuse. And Caligula did not keep this system confined to the palace. He sent officials throughout the empire to enforce similar practices, spreading his cult of domination into the provinces and ensuring the shadow of his rule reached far beyond Rome itself. Across the provinces, governors and military commanders began imitating Caligula's behavior, creating their own twisted versions of the imperial court. The message was unmistakable. Loyalty to the emperor meant adopting his culture of excess and humiliation. Officials quickly understood that their continued favor depended on enforcing the same environment of coercion and domination that existed in Rome. They competed with one another in inventing new forms of public degradation and displays of power, sending elaborate reports back to the capital, hoping to win imperial approval. Soon, a system of oppression spread across the empire. Families lived in fear of being summoned to the residences of imperial representatives, knowing that refusal meant punishment, exile, or execution. Women throughout the provinces learned that their safety no longer depended on law or social rank. Fathers and husbands lived with the constant anxiety that imperial authority could violate their households at any moment. The exploitation of the body had become another tool of statecraft. By 40 CE, the culture of excess had reached extremes that shocked even those who had witnessed Caligula's earlier outrages. Court gatherings devolved into sprawling displays of debauchery, where hundreds of attendants were compelled to participate in ceremonies of humiliation and submission. These events were not private pleasures. They were staged spectacles meant to demonstrate the emperor's absolute control over every aspect of Roman life. Caligula's final months were marked by ceremonies and feasts that resembled theatrical productions on an imperial scale. Senators, noble families, slaves, and foreign envoys were forced to take part in elaborate performances whose purpose was to destroy dignity, hierarchy, and morality itself. The emperor turned these events into demonstrations of total power, rituals designed to show that there was no law, no tradition, no god higher than the emperor's will. Caligula seemed intent on making a philosophical statement about the emptiness of Rome's traditions in the face of unchecked power. He wasn't just violating customs, he was attempting to erase them. The breaking point came when Caligula announced plans to transform his private excesses into a state religion, demanding that all Roman citizens participate in rituals of loyalty and submission to the emperor. It was this threat to formalize his abuses into law that finally united his enemies. On January 24th, 41 CE, Caligula was assassinated by members of the Praetorian Guard in the hidden corridors of his own palace. But even in death, the memory of his cruelty continued to haunt the empire. The conspiracy that killed him was driven by more than political ideals. Many of the conspirators had seen their own families coerced, threatened, or used as pawns in the emperor's twisted displays of dominance. When Claudius rose to power, he inherited more than a throne. He inherited the nightmare Caligula had left behind. The palace itself was evidence of the damage. Chambers designed for ritualized humiliation. Artwork that glorified the emperor's abuse of authority, and records documenting his manipulation of Rome's noble families. Much of this evidence was quietly destroyed, not to honor Caligula, but to protect the victims from further shame and political ruin. Entire sections of the palace were sealed, rebuilt, or erased from the architectural record, as if the new regime hoped to bury the memory of what had happened. The cover-up extended to history itself. Ancient writers acknowledged Caligula's excesses, but many details were softened or omitted. Not because the events were forgotten, but because they were too painful, too dangerous, or too shameful to fully record. Ancient writers used careful, coded language that hid the full scale of the palace abuses. Many families preferred it that way. Putting the details into public record would have only deepened the shame and humiliation of those who lived through it. Perhaps the darkest legacy of Caligula's rule was how effectively he silenced his victims. Roman society was built on reputation and honor, which meant survivors were trapped. Speaking openly about what happened would destroy their standing, their families, and their futures. Women who were coerced by the emperor knew society would blame them, not their abuser. Men who were forced into submission could not admit their helplessness without sacrificing their honor. Children who were exposed to the emperor's excesses grew up with trauma they could never acknowledge. This culture of silence ensured that we will never fully know the extent of Caligula's crimes. Families erased their own memories. Historians softened accounts. Society preferred discretion over truth. There was no justice, no confronting what happened, only a collective effort to bury it. But the consequences did not die with Caligula. The trauma he inflicted created long-lasting wounds that spread through Roman society for generations. Children who witnessed violence or coercion carried those scars into adulthood. Some repeated the patterns they learned. Others lived permanently damaged by what they saw. Marriages broken by humiliation never truly healed. Families that survived often did so at the cost of their emotional and psychological stability. The Roman aristocracy never recovered from what happened behind palace walls, and Caligula's reign created a blueprint for future emperors, proof that exploiting others was an effective political weapon. Even after his assassination, the idea that power entitled a ruler to take whatever he wanted remained rooted in Rome's imperial culture. Today, visitors walk through the ruins of the Palatine Hill, admiring its architecture. But few understand the darker history those walls once witnessed, the invisible legacy of fear and silence that haunted the empire long after Caligula was gone. Those ruins on Palatine Hill were once the setting for something far darker than the marble fragments suggest. The same floors that now echo with tourist footsteps once witnessed not luxury, but suffering. What looks like crumbling masonry and broken walls are the remnants of a palace where people were coerced, humiliated, and broken by imperial power. The evidence is still there if you know where to look. Underground chambers, divided rooms, and hidden corridors that once held terrified people waiting to be summoned by the emperor. You can sense the echoes of those who never left. The noblewoman who took her own life rather than face another summons. The child who witnessed cruelty and carried the memory forever. The aristocratic family whose status offered no protection against the emperor's demands. Their names were erased from official records, but their stories remain etched into the stones. Caligula's transformation of the imperial palace into a place of fear lasted only 4 years. But the shockwaves traveled far beyond that moment. His version of absolute power showed how quickly civilization can collapse when a single ruler decides that every person, every family, every sacred institution exists only for his pleasure and control. And it reminds us that exploitation isn't an ancient anomaly. It's a recurring pattern whenever authority goes unchecked. The palace may be ruins now, but it stands as a warning. The abuse of the vulnerable by those in power has never depended on technology or time, only on someone willing to cross every boundary and a system unable to stop them. Caligula left more than political chaos behind. He left a legacy of fear, silence, and psychological devastation that outlived his reign. His story is preserved not in monuments or statues, but in the scars carried by countless victims. The real tragedy of his rule wasn't just the corruption of power, it was the destruction of trust, dignity, and humanity itself.